The squad car's air conditioning had died weeks ago, so the summer night felt less like a patrol and more like being slow-roasted in polyester. Detective Elias Vance was 20 minutes into a double shot of lukewarm coffee and a monologue about municipal budget cuts. His partner, Officer Lena Reyes, a woman who treated every shift like a personal philosophical retreat, simply gazed out at the rain-slicked suburban sprawl of Cypress Creek. See, Lena, it's not just a busted AC. It's a metaphor, Vance grumbled, running a hand over his close-cropped gray hair. The city's sweating, and we're the ones stuck driving the coffin. Reyes turned her head, her eyes dark and steady. The car works, Elias. The radio works. The coffee works. Anything else is noise. Vance just scoffed, but a smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. Reyes was the kind of cop who saw only the task, stripping away the drama that Vance thrived on. They were an odd pair, but they covered each other's blind spots. Vance chased the adrenaline. Reyes sought the undeniable truth. It was just after 2 a.m. when the radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice a sudden, unwelcome intrusion. Unit 204, possible 10 to 55 on Crestline Drive. Single female caller, non-responsive. Line remains open. Address is 419 Crestline. Proceed with caution. A 10 to 55 was a silent alarm or an open line, the kind of call that was usually a cat knocking a phone off the hook or a clumsy drunk dialing 911. But the dispatcher's tone was tight, a high-frequency tremor that made the hairs on Vance's arm prickle. For 19 Crestline? That's Sector 4, Vance said, hitting the siren briefly, just a chirp, before turning down the dead-quiet street. Sector 4 of Cypress Creek wasn't a bad neighborhood, but it was old. A handful of original houses from the 1930s, big, clapboard structures with deep, overgrown yards. They were the kind of places locals called settled, but which Vance thought of as forgotten. They didn't even have streetlights, just pools of sickly yellow from porch lamps fighting the canopy. Reyes pulled the cruiser right up to the curb of 419 Crestline. The house was a 2-story box with a steep, sagging roof. No lights were on inside. The yard was a mess of tangled ivy and ancient rose bushes. It felt less like a home and more like an interruption in the landscape. No forced entry, Reyes murmured, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Windows look locked. No obvious signs of disturbance. Vance checked his sidearm, the familiar weight a small comfort. Except for the open line. Dispatch said non-responsive, not dialing error. Let's go. I'll take the front, you take the side windows. They approached the front door. Vance knocked a loud, official rap 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 and announced, Cypress Creek Police Department. Open up. Silence. Complete, total silence. No barking dog, no nervous steps, no light flicking on. Even the usual symphony of crickets and summer bugs seemed to have fallen mute. Vance frowned, moving closer to the old wooden door. She's definitely home. Dispatch traced the landline. He tried the knob. Locked, Reyes walked back from the side, a new tension in her shoulders. The back door is unlocked. I didn't touch it. Something's wrong, Elias. I don't like the smell. Vance smelled only the damp earth and the old wood rot. What is it? Not a scent. A stillness. The air around this place is heavy, like it's holding its breath. Vance nodded, his initial dismissiveness melting into professional focus. All right, we'll go in slow. Radio silent until we're inside. They moved around the side of the house, the old grass crunching under their boots. The back door was a flimsy screen door over a solid wooden one. Reyes drew her weapon. Vance did the same. She pushed the wooden door open slowly. It didn't creak, which was strange for such an old house. It just swung inward with a sickening, liquid schlick sound. The air that rushed out wasn't heavy, it was cold. Colder than the summer night, colder than it had any right to be. And the smell was no longer just rot and damp. It was sharp, metallic, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like spoiled flowers. They stepped inside a small, dark kitchen. The only illumination came from their flashlights, cutting through the thick, absolute blackness. Reyes immediately aimed her light at the floor. "Blood," she whispered. Her voice roughed out a thin, dark smear ran from the center of the kitchen floor toward an archway leading to the living room. It wasn't a pool, just a long, continuous drag mark, like something heavy had been pulled, not walked. Vance kept his weapon up, his light sweeping the shadows. Caller's name. Dispatch didn't have one yet. Just a traced landline. Check the landline. See if you can pick up the receiver. Find the source of the silence. Reyes cautiously followed the smear of blood to a small table where an old rotary phone sat. She reached out with a gloved hand and carefully lifted the receiver, holding it away from her ear. She listened, then slowly lowered it. "The line is dead. Elias," she said, her eyes wide, reflecting the beam of her own flashlight. But dispatch said it was open. Non-responsive. They were still listening. Reyes pointed her light at the telephone base. A small, black box was affixed to the side of the unit, no larger than a cigarette packet, with a tiny, blinking red LED. "That's not police equipment," she said, her voice dropping. Vance moved closer, his gut clenching. He reached out, his finger hovering near the black box. Before he could touch it, the LED light blinked 3 times, short, long, and then the small box spoke. It wasn't a voice. It was a digital, synthesized noise, like an automated voice on an answering machine, but horribly distorted, running backward. Then, just before the circuit died and the box fell silent forever, a single, perfectly clear word was uttered, a soft, mechanical breath into the cold air of the kitchen. "Found." The synthetic whisper of "found" hung in the frigid air, quickly drowned out by the metallic click of the device frying itself. Vance immediately kicked the dead black box off the table, sending it skittering across the blood-smeared linoleum. Tech wasn't standard, Lena. Not a standard tap, not a standard bug, Vance growled, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was no longer a silent alarm. It was staged. Reyes didn't reply. She was already moving, following the drag mark that led from the kitchen through the archway into the main living space. The living room was worse. It was a chaotic explosion of misplaced objects that spoke not of a struggle, but of a methodical, terrifying search. Books were pulled off shelves, pages ripped out and scattered like confetti. Cushions were sliced open, the stuffing spilling onto the dusty rug. The furniture hadn't been knocked over. It had been dismantled. They were looking for something, Reyes observed, her voice tight, echoing in the confined space. Something small. Vance's flashlight beam danced over the destruction, focusing on a mantelpiece where a row of framed photographs lay face down. He turned one over. It was a woman in her late 50s, smiling, her eyes bright behind large glasses. The supposed caller. He looked back at the trail of blood, which now seemed thicker, more viscous, soaking into the antique rug. Whatever they were looking for, they found it. And whatever they did to her, they did it before they called us. They followed the trail deeper into the house, past a dark stairwell, and toward a closed wooden door at the back of the ground floor. The air here was noticeably colder, the sickly sweet smell of spoiled flowers and metallic blood becoming overwhelming. Reyes stopped short of the door. "Wait. Hear that?" Vance strained his ears, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Silence. Total and absolute. No, not silence. A hum. Low. Deep. Like a transformer in the distance. Reyes was right. Beneath the unnatural stillness, there was a steady, almost vibrational thrumming emanating from behind the closed door. Vance nodded. "On 3. I'll kick, you cover." He braced himself. 1. He could feel the cold radiating through the wood of the door. 2. The humid air was turning icy in his lungs. 3. Vance drove his boot heel into the old wood next to the lock. The door splintered inward with a loud crack, and they plunged into the room, flashlights cutting arcs through the darkness. It wasn't a utility closet or a pantry. It was a study, but unlike the rest of the house, it wasn't chaotic. It was meticulously organized, shelf after shelf of old filing cabinets, labeled and categorized in neat rows. It was an archive room, and in the center of the room, standing completely still, was a man. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a dark, clean suit that seemed out of place in the dusty room. He was turned away from them, facing a massive corkboard that covered the far wall, illuminated by a single, bare industrial bulb hanging from the ceiling. This was the source of the low hum, a faulty, cheap light fixture. The man wasn't moving. He wasn't armed. He wasn't even startled. Police. Drop to your knees, hands where I can see them. Vance barked, weapon trained directly on the man's back. The man didn't move. Reyes shifted, moving to the side to gain a better angle, her weapon steady. Elias, look at the wall. Vance adjusted his flashlight. The corkboard was covered in thousands of photographs, newspaper clippings, maps, and cryptic handwritten notes, all connected by red string that formed an impossible, complex web. It was a conspiracy theorist's nightmare, but the subject was the horror. The images were all crime scenes, but not standard ones. They were old, black and white photos of missing persons, mostly teenagers and young adults, spanning decades. Each photo was marked with a date and a tiny, hand-drawn symbol, a simple open circle with a single vertical line cutting through it. Then, Vance noticed the center of the corkboard. Pinned to the center, right over the most dense web of red string, was the woman from the photograph, the caller. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, and her glasses were gone. Her eyes, open and vacant, stared directly into the room. But this wasn't a photo. It was her head, carefully severed at the neck, pinned to the corkboard like a trophy. And the red string connected to the pin holding her. A choked sound escaped Vance's throat. Reyes swore under her breath, her eyes flicking back to the man in the suit. He's still just standing there. The man in the suit finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to the wall, right beside the woman's pinned head. He picked up a piece of chalk that was resting on a small shelf. Then, he began to draw on the wall next to the gruesome centerpiece. He didn't turn around. He began to draw the same symbol that was on all the old photographs, the open circle with the single vertical line. As he finished the symbol, the humming sound from the light fixture grew louder, vibrating the floor beneath their boots. The lights in the room flickered, casting strobe-like shadows across the grotesque archive. Turn around and put the chalk down. Now, Vance yelled, his voice cracking from the tension. The man drew one last, small mark beneath the symbol. He was marking the crime scene with the same sign he'd used for every victim on the board. Then, with agonizing slowness, he began to turn. But it wasn't the man's face that horrified them. It was his eyes. They were not the eyes of a person. They were a dull, milky white, completely devoid of iris and pupil, reflecting the harsh light like twin, wet stones. And as he fully faced them, the suit he wore, which looked black in the dim light, seemed to shift. It wasn't fabric. It was a fine, uniform layer of something that looked like perfectly dried, black powder, and the man didn't look at them. He looked through them, focusing somewhere beyond the back wall of the archive. His mouth remained perfectly straight, but a sound issued from his throat, not words, but a rapid, multitonal clicking, like a swarm of insects trapped inside a cavity. He was neither running nor fighting. He was simply observing them, an unblinking, clicking, wide-eyed statue. Reyes squeezed the trigger, her training taking over. Bang! The shot ripped through the confined space. The man didn't fall. The black powder of his suit rippled, and where the bullet should have struck his chest, a small, dark cloud of fine, black dust exploded outward, absorbing the force. The sound of the clicking stopped instantly. The man took one step toward them. The black dust suit seemed to contract, shrinking around him, and for a terrifying second, Vance saw the outline of something underneath that was too long, too thin, and too fundamentally wrong to be human. Vance fired twice. Bang, bang, the same result. Two clouds of black dust puffing out, and the figure continued his slow, methodical advance. The hum of the light fixture was now a high-pitched, mind-numbing squeal. Reyes yelled, "He's not registering the rounds, Elias. Fall back." They scrambled backward, out of the archive room, through the splintered door frame. Vance glanced behind him and saw the white-eyed figure stop at the doorway, framed in the buzzing, strobe-like light. He wasn't pursuing them, merely watching them retreat. As they burst back into the dark living room, Reyes slammed the splintered archive door shut, but not before they both heard the creature's final, mechanical noise, a simple, flat thud as it dropped the piece of chalk onto the wooden floor. They ran for the back door, adrenaline masking the pain in their joints. They threw the door open and sprinted back toward the cruiser, Reyes pulling out her radio. 204 to dispatch. Officer needs assistance. Shots fired. For 19 Crestline, Sector 4. Suspect is non-responsive to rounds. Repeat. Non-responsive to rounds. Get a perimeter up now. Vance was already fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking violently as he climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the ignition. Nothing. He tried again. The engine sputtered, then died. The hell? It was fine, he yelled, slamming the steering wheel. Reyes looked up from the radio, her face pale in the faint dashboard light. The car won't start, Elias. And look. She pointed a shaking finger at the side mirror, standing perfectly still, at the edge of the porch, illuminated only by the faint, eerie yellow light from a distant neighbor's house, was the figure in the black suit. Its white, sightless eyes seemed to bore through the darkness. It made no move toward them. It simply stood there, an immovable black silhouette against the backdrop of the murdered woman's house. Then, from the dark sky directly above the house, the low, deep hum began again. Not from the light fixture, but from the air itself. And a single, perfectly clear drop of thick, black liquid, like heavy oil, fell from the sky and splattered on the windshield. The car refused to start. Elias Vance frantically turned the key 3 times, the ignition whining in protest, before dying completely. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and the inexplicable scent of that heavy, cold black oil that had splattered on the windshield. "It's dead," Vance hissed, checking his rearview mirror. The man in the black suit was still standing on the porch, motionless, a sentinel carved from the night. The milky white of his eyes was barely visible now, but the feeling of being watched was a physical weight pressing down on the car's roof. Reyes, already out of the cruiser, was peering under the hood, flashlight beam cutting through the steam and humidity. "It's not the battery, Elias. The wiring is melted. Not a short circuit, but fused. Everything running to the ignition coil." Vance slammed his door open. "That's impossible. We were just driving it." "I know," Reyes said, her voice strained. She pointed her light at the black oil drop on the windshield. It hadn't beaded up like water. It had stained the glass, etching a small, circular mark into the surface. It didn't want us to leave. They needed to move. Backup was minutes away, but those minutes felt like an eternity under the white-eyed stare of the figure. "Radio," Vance said, grabbing the mic. "We need to get eyes on that suspect and get out of this sector. We proceed on foot, down Crestline. Keep calling for air support, Lena. I want lights and noise." As they started their retreat, walking backward down the center of the street, Reyes kept her eyes fixed on the man on the porch. He still hadn't moved. The surrounding silence was once again total, the low hum from the archive room gone, replaced by an unnerving void of sound. "He's letting us go," Reyes whispered. "He's done what he came to do, and now he's just marking the territory." He absorbed 3 rounds without flinching, Lena. "He's not human, and whatever he is, it found what it wanted in that woman's archive room," Vance countered, his mind racing. He was already planning the official report, knowing how insane the words "black dust suit" and "severed head on a corkboard" would look in print. Suddenly, a loud pop shattered the silence. They whipped around. It wasn't the man. It was the industrial light bulb hanging in the archive room. It had finally overloaded and burst. Now, the house at 419 Crestline was swallowed by the blackness of the sector. Only the faint, yellow porch light from a house 2 doors down offered any distant reference, and then a new sound began. Not a noise from the house, but from the darkness of the trees and overgrown hedges lining the street. A light, scraping sound, like dry leaves being dragged across asphalt. It was coming from behind them, further down Crestline, perimeters coming from the north side. Reyes breathed, clutching her shotgun. "The scraping is coming from the south. The whole street is closed off." Vance raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam into the shadows of the nearest yard. The beam caught movement fast, low to the ground. Not one shape, but multiple, darting among the rose bushes and thick ivy. They looked like small, hunched animals, moving with a jerky, unnatural rhythm. As one of them briefly emerged into the scant light, Vance felt a new wave of nausea hit him. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, or the remains of one, crawling on all 4s. It was naked, the skin a pale, sickly gray, and its limbs were bent at impossible angles. Its face was turned up to the sky, and it was the source of the high-pitched, scraping sound. Its long, broken fingernails were dragging on the pavement. "Down. Get behind the car," Vance yelled, shoving Reyes toward the disabled cruiser. They ducked behind the engine block. The crawling figures were silent now, but Vance could hear their heavy, raspy breathing getting closer, surrounding the perimeter they had abandoned. They moved like a wave, consuming the quiet street. "I only see 2, maybe 3, Elias," Reyes said, her voice a ragged whisper. "But they're fast. And they're not natural." Vance glanced back at 419 Crestline. The man in the black suit was gone from the porch. "The black suit is gone." "This is the cleanup crew," Vance said, sighting down his pistol. "They're protecting the area. Whatever the archive holds, and whatever that man is, they're its guard dogs." The first crawler made it to the curb. Its eyes, unlike the man in the suit, were wide and black, reflecting no light. It started to pull itself over the concrete curb, its mouth opening to reveal a dark, swollen tongue. Reyes fired the shotgun. The blast roared, ripping through the silence. The crawler was flung backward, its body shattering against the wooden fence with a wet, pulpy sound. But the moment the shot echoed, the other sounds began. A chorus of the scraping, jerky movements coming from all directions, no longer quiet, but frantic. And then, a sound from inside the cruiser. Reyes spun around, flashlight trained on the back window. The black oil that had stained the windshield had seeped into the interior. It was dripping slowly from the roof lining, forming a small, black puddle on the back seat, and from that growing puddle, a piece of white chalk, perfectly clean, slowly rolled out onto the vinyl. Vance snatched it up, his blood running cold. It was the same chalk the man in the suit had used in the archive room. The chalk they had heard drop onto the floor. "It's here, Lena," Vance choked out. "It never left the sector. It's inside the house, it's outside the house, and it's in the car." He turned back to the street, and in the space where the second crawler should have been, there was nothing but a low, black mound of fine, swirling dust. The dust was moving, coalescing, reforming not into a crawler, but into a low, four-legged shape. It raised its head, and Vance realized the shape was a perfectly formed, jet-black canine, a sleek, powerful guard dog. Made entirely of the black dust from the suit, its eyes too bright, burning pinpricks of white light, the dust dog let out a silent, vibrating snarl that they felt more than heard, and then it sprang. The dust dog was a blur of black motion, silent except for the grating scrape of the fine powder over the asphalt. Vance didn't hesitate. He swung his weapon up and fired, not at the center mass, but aiming low for the creature's legs, hoping to disrupt its form. The round hit the creature's shoulder. Instead of flesh or bone, the black dust simply exploded outward in a small, spherical cloud, the creature's shape instantaneously shifting to compensate for the missing mass. The dog was briefly a three-legged, lopsided sprint, then the dust reflowed, reforming its sleek, terrifying shape as it closed the distance. The chalk Elias. Reyes yelled, firing her last shotgun shell at the two remaining crawlers scrambling toward them. Vance looked down at the piece of chalk in his hand, the chalk from the archive room. It felt impossibly cold. He didn't know why, but the object felt like a key or a trigger. The dust dog reached the front bumper of the cruiser, its head lowered for a throat-aimed lunge. Without conscious thought, Vance hurled the chalk straight at the creature's head. The moment the white chalk connected with the black dust, there was no explosion, no blast. Instead, a soundless implosion. The entire dust dog collapsed in on itself, drawing the surrounding light and air into a dense, perfect sphere of black powder, no larger than a tennis ball, before it hit the pavement with a faint clink. The sphere of dust didn't dissipate. It just lay there, perfectly spherical, utterly inert. The crawling figures, now just feet away, stopped dead. They turned their black, vacant eyes not toward Vance and Reyes, but toward the house at 419 Crestline. Then, with the same horrifying, broken-limbed movement, they scrambled back into the deep shadows of the hedges and vanished. The total silence returned. The sector was contained once more. Vance and Reyes looked at each other, their faces slick with sweat, the adrenaline slowly draining away to be replaced by cold, hard disbelief. What in God's name was that? Vance finally managed, his voice hoarse. Reyes pointed to the inert black sphere on the ground. That was a defensive mechanism. And that chalk, that was a switch. It was part of the lockbox he was guarding. Before they could process it further, the sound of approaching sirens, loud, bright, and blessedly normal, broke the quiet. Red and blue lights flashed over the canopy of Crestline Drive. The aftermath and the arrival of the Cypress Creek PD was a controlled chaos. The entire block was cordoned off. Chief Miller took one look at Vance and Reyes, sweaty, covered in dust, and standing next to a disabled cruiser with melted wiring, and immediately pulled them aside. Give me the short version, Elias. I have a severed head on a corkboard and an entire forensics team standing down because the patrol car looks like a bomb went off in the engine block. Vance told him, keeping the description of the assailant clinical: tall male, non-responsive to rounds, wearing a strange suit of black dust. He intentionally omitted the white eyes and the clicking noise, knowing those details would land him a mandatory psych evaluation before morning. He handed over the spherical black dust sample. We need specialized forensic analysis on this house, Chief. The environment inside is compromised. And that dust isn't gunpowder. Chief Miller was still chewing on the words severed head and non-responsive to rounds. He looked at the dust ball in the evidence bag, then back at Vance. I've already called her in. She's on her way from the state office. Who, Chief? Dr. Vivian Choi. Forensics consultant. She doesn't deal with the normal stuff, Elias. She deals with the cases that don't make sense. The impossible crime scenes. She was profiling those old Sector 4 missing person files last month. Said there was a pattern. Now, you tell me about the archive room. An hour later, as the sun began to edge above the horizon, casting a sickly, gray light over the sector, Dr. Vivian Choi arrived. She was younger than Vance expected, meticulous and precise, dressed in sterile blue scrubs under a thin jacket. She carried an aluminum briefcase that looked more like something for a field operation than forensic work. She bypassed the chief, walked straight to Vance and Reyes, and looked them over, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. Detective Vance, Officer Reyes. Your uniforms are contaminated. You will be debriefed and immediately undergo an ozone decontamination cycle before leaving the station. Now, the contents of the archive room. Reyes pulled out the evidence bag containing the small, cold piece of white chalk. This was found in the cruiser. We heard it drop in the house, but then it appeared in the car after the engine failed. Choi took the bag, not with gloves, but with a pair of fine titanium tweezers, and dropped it into a heavy-duty lead-lined canister. The transfer mechanism is what interests me. Not a physical transfer, but an environmental one. The house is a node, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. She then looked at the black dust sphere. And this. Vance, you said the suit absorbed 3 rounds. The projectile energy was converted into a localized thermal event, which the dust material used to re-engineer its molecular structure. It absorbed the energy, momentarily becoming hyperdense, then redispersed. You hitting it with the chalk disrupted its catalyst. Vance stared at her. Catalyst. The chalk is pure calcium carbonate, but it's been treated. It's not a drawing tool. It's a marker. A signature. Choi's expression was grim as she looked toward the house. The woman in the house, Elara Jennings, wasn't a random victim. She was an amateur researcher, obsessed with a string of disappearances from this sector dating back to the 1950s. She found the pattern. Choi pointed to a small, nearly invisible black stain on the street where the dust dog had been neutralized. You didn't just interrupt a murder. You interrupted a claim. The man in the black suit, your non-responsive suspect, he's not a killer. He's a collector. He takes the victim, and then he takes the evidence. He came for Elara's research, and he left his mark. She turned to a group of CSI technicians awaiting her orders. Nobody touches anything inside 419 Crestline without a Class A hazmat suit and a full vacuum seal. I want every single molecule of that black dust collected. I want the temperature of the archive room monitored every 5 minutes. And I want the corkboard photographed, cataloged, and then carefully, very carefully, removed as a single piece. The chalk mark he left on the wall is crucial. Choi adjusted her glasses, looking back at Vance and Reyes, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. The open circle with the line through it, the symbol? It translates roughly to the known void. Your Sector 4 isn't just a location, Detective. It's a hunting ground. And you two just stepped into the very center of its oldest trap. The Cypress Creek PD precinct felt unnaturally bright and sterile after the darkness of Sector 4. Vance and Reyes were sequestered in the medical observation room, completing their preliminary statements while waiting for the decontamination process. Their shared trauma, however, was worse than any physical doctor. Choi worked tirelessly in a secured forensic lab across town, but her updates were already sending seismic shocks through the department. The findings of the archive Choi's first official report landed on Chief Miller's desk, and a copy was forwarded directly to Vance. It was titled, Environmental Anomaly and Molecular Contamination at 419 Crestline. The key findings were terrifyingly brief. Temperature differential. The archive room registered an ambient temperature of 2 ring operator C, 35.6 ring operator F, while the rest of the house was 26 ring operator C, 78.8 ring operator F. There was no utility malfunction to explain the isolated, deep cold, the black dust, The spherical sample and the microscopic residue collected showed the black powder was composed primarily of carbon, but arranged in a highly complex, non-organic crystalline lattice structure that defied known physics. Choi's conclusion: the material was a near-perfect energy sink. It absorbed kinetic energy, like bullets, and thermal energy, like the cold, without damage, using the absorbed energy to maintain its shape and density. The chalk. The chalk was indeed treated calcium carbonate, but its surface was covered in microetchings that, under magnification, formed the same known void symbol, acting like a resonant frequency dampener. Hitting the dust construct with the symbol's physical manifestation had, temporarily, cancelled its structural integrity. The implication was clear. The black-suited man was not wearing a suit. He was the suit, a manifestation of engineered inert energy. The corkboard revelation. Meanwhile, the crime scene unit had carefully removed the corkboard. It was laid out on a massive table in the evidence locker, the horrific centerpiece, Elara Jennings's pinned head covered by a sheet. Doctor Choi presented her analysis to Vance and Reyes, her voice low and devoid of emotion. Elara Jennings spent the last 5 years of her life documenting a pattern of disappearances that the police dismissed as runaways or cold cases, Choi explained, pointing to the web of red string on the board. The pattern isn't chronological or social. It's geographical. The map tacked to the board was a historical survey of Cypress Creek. The red strings connected 47 different missing person reports dating back to 1957. When Choi traced the lines on the map, they all converged on a single point, the intersection of 3 streets in Sector 4, the block surrounding 419 Crestline. Elara realized that every decade, roughly every 10 to 12 years, the area claims a cluster of victims. But she found something else. Something she didn't have time to properly mark. Choi pointed to the edge of the board. Elara had started a new sequence, connecting the symbol known void not to the victims, but to addresses near the perimeter of Sector 4. The first marked address belongs to a former city councilman who disappeared in 1988. The second, a journalist who covered the disappearances in 1999. The third, Elara Jennings's own address. Choi paused, letting the silence settle. She wasn't just documenting the missing, she was documenting the people who got too close to understanding why they went missing. The black-suited figure, the collector, wasn't just taking Elara's life. He was neutralizing a threat to the sector's hidden mechanism. The internal conflict. The official report detailing the initial patrol was met with immediate internal skepticism. While the discovery of the archive and the murder were undeniable, the account of the non-responsive assailant and the dust dog was redacted from public reports and labeled possible hallucination due to stress. Chief Miller cornered Vance in the hallway, his face a roadmap of pressure and fear. Elias, this is already national news. We have a cannibalistic cult theory spreading like wildfire. Your description of a man made of black dust-absorbing bullets is going nowhere. You need to simplify the narrative, or internal affairs will have your badge. Chief, I won't lie about what happened in that house, Vance insisted, holding Miller's gaze. We were attacked by something that doesn't follow the laws of physics. That archive is evidence of 40 years of cover-up. And who covered it up, Elias? Do you know? Miller whispered, glancing around the empty hallway. Elara Jennings was tracking people who got too close to the truth. And now you and Reyes are the next names on the list. The hook, the echo back in the secure lab. Dr. Choi was running a final scan on a microchip she had found embedded in the dust chalk sphere. It wasn't a tracking device. It was a data storage unit. When she downloaded the contents, there were only 2 files. The first was an audio recording, the exact moment Elara Jennings had placed the 911 call, right before the line went silent. But the audio was looped. The last 2 seconds of the recording played over and over, a soft, choked whisper. They know my name. They know my name. They know my name. The second file was a simple text document. It contained a single list of names, categorized not by date of birth or disappearance, but by rank and badge number. The list was long. It was a roster of police officers, former city officials, and even a few names from the current police department. They were all marked with a known void symbol. The last entry on the list, typed exactly 5 minutes after Elara Jennings's whispered final call, was not a missing person. It was a name and a badge number recently added, followed by the terrifying symbol of the void. Doctor. Choi stared at the screen, her heart freezing in her chest. The name was Detective Elias Vance, badge 417. But beneath his name, a new line had been added by the data collector, the black-suited figure, a simple, chilling footnote, frowny face, target acquired, the Echo. The discovery in the lab didn't just rattle Dr. Choi, it activated her. She immediately sealed the evidence, the microchip, the chalk, and the list, and called Vance's secure line, bypassing standard police communication channels. Vance and Reyes were still waiting for their official clearance, sitting in the dull lighting of the precinct medical bay. When Vance answered the call, Choi's voice was a low, urgent drone. Detective, stop talking to anyone at the precinct. Don't file anything else. Don't look at the Sector 4 files. You are compromised. Vance's stomach dropped. What did you find, Doctor? Choi didn't waste time on pleasantries. She relayed the contents of the microchip, Elara Jennings's final whispered recording, they know my name, and the list of marked individuals. She emphasized the last 2 entries. Elara Jennings was marked for discovery. You, Detective Vance, are marked for acquisition, Choi said. The final note on the file, target acquired, the Echo, is crucial. That thing in the black dust isn't just a collector, it's a strategist. It's using your fear, your confusion, it's using the noise you made. Vance looked at Reyes, who was watching him with sharp, questioning eyes. He repeated the key phrase, target acquired, the Echo. Reyes leaned in, her voice barely audible. The Echo is the sound of the gunshots, Elias. The noise that broke the silence of the sector. It took the woman's head and the evidence, and now it's coming for the people who made the most noise. Internal compromise. Vance and Reyes realized their entire department was now a liability. They couldn't trust their chief, who was clearly under political pressure, nor could they trust their colleagues, some of whom were named on the list. We need to get out of the precinct, Lena, Vance muttered, handing Reyes a copy of the redacted report they'd been filling out. We need to go back to the source, but we can't be seen talking to Choi or touching the evidence. As if on cue, a sudden flurry of activity erupted in the hallway outside the medical bay. 2 internal affairs, IA, officers strode purposefully toward the room, their faces stern and unyielding. Detective Vance, Officer Reyes, the lead IA officer said, his voice clipped. We've been ordered to escort you to mandatory psychological review and to seize your personal effects. Hand over your sidearms and badges immediately. This is standard procedure following an officer-involved hallucination. Vance knew this was a containment move. If they gave up their weapons, they were neutralized. They looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement of the danger passing between them. We're going to need to see the paperwork for that, Reyes said, stepping forward, her hand resting near her holstered weapon. The paperwork is being drawn up now, the IA officer said, taking another step closer. Don't make this a physical resistance. You are contaminated witnesses. Vance saw his chance. He pointed toward the precinct's main entrance, feigning surprise. Wait a minute. Is that Chief Miller talking to that reporter? I thought he said this was sealed. Both IA officers reflexively turned toward the main entrance, distracted for a critical second. That was all Vance and Reyes needed. Go! Vance shouted. They bolted, not toward the entrance, but out the back fire exit and into the utility alley. The IA officers were immediately on their heels, yelling into their radios for backup. The leak as they drove out of the precinct garage in Reyes's personal, unmarked sedan. Vance checked his phone. The internet was already ablaze. A local independent news outlet, known for its sensationalism, had posted a blurry photograph taken from a distance of the crime scene at 419 Crestline. The article wasn't about the severed head, it was about Elara Jennings's research. The headline blared, Sector 4 Silence. Police cover up 50 years of disappearances connected to rare earth minerals in Crestline Drive houses. The photo accompanying the article was a high-resolution, leaked image of the corner of the corkboard, clearly showing the map and Elara's notes about geographical convergence. The article, however, spun the truth into a conspiracy about industrial espionage and mineral rights. Someone on that list of marked officers is leaking the sanitized version of the truth to cover the real one, Reyes deduced, speeding down the road toward the state highway. They're trying to bury the known void under a pile of lies about money and cults. It's a deflection, but it points to the sector, Vance confirmed. Elara's research showed the disappearances happened every 10 years, concentrated in that area. What does that area have that the rest of Cypress Creek doesn't? The tunnel. Vance called Dr. Choi, who was now leaving the lab and driving toward a prearranged safe house. The mineral angle is a lie, but the geographical convergence is real, Choi confirmed. I ran a satellite thermal scan of Sector 4. Most of the residential area is normal. But 419 Crestline and the 3 surrounding properties are built directly on top of a massive, dense seam of magnetite, iron oxide. The ground is highly magnetic. A mineral deposit? Reyes asked. How does that lead to dust dogs and white-eyed collectors? It doesn't. But the cold does, Choi responded, her voice strained. The severe cold in that archive room is a localized energy drain. I cross-referenced the magnetite seam with Elara's data. Every time a cluster of people disappeared, there was a recorded, unexplained surge of electromagnetic activity in that precise area. Choi continued, the realization making her voice tremble. The magnetite isn't the cause, it's the conductor. It's concentrating the energy drain. The black dust isn't just absorbing energy, it's made of it. It's a construct, Detective. And Sector 4 is its power source. As they drove under a long, dark freeway underpass, the car lights suddenly flickered and died. The engine whined, sounding exactly like the cruiser's dying ignition. Reyes instinctively slammed on the brakes. The air inside the car dropped 20 degrees instantly, the cold sinking into their bones. From the absolute darkness of the tunnel ahead, a high-pitched, multitonal clicking began. It was the sound the black-suited man had made in the archive room. Vance grabbed his flashlight, turning the beam toward the sound. A figure stepped out of the blackness, framed by the faint, distant exit light. It was the black-suited collector. But this time, he wasn't alone. Hovering silently behind him, illuminated by the cold, faint glow of the tunnel, were the hunched, gray shapes of the crawlers, many more than they had seen before, emerging from the tunnel walls like bats from a cave. The collector raised one hand, and the low, heavy hum started again, vibrating through the asphalt. He's not waiting for us to return to the sector, Reyes whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. He brought the sector to us. The car was trapped in absolute darkness, sandwiched between the relentless cold emanating from the figure ahead and the solid, dead end of the tunnel behind them. The black-suited collector stood 40 feet away, his white eyes the only visible feature in the gloom. The clicking sound escalated, turning into a chattering, high-frequency signal that seemed to bypass their ears and settle directly in their skulls. He neutralized the car's electrical system the second we entered the magnetic field of this tunnel, Reyes said, her voice tight with suppressed panic. The magnetite, Elias. It's conducting whatever energy he uses. The hunched crawlers behind the collector began to move, scraping and dragging themselves forward with alarming speed. Vance knew they couldn't shoot their way out. The rounds were useless against the black dust. They had to disrupt the collector's link to the environment. The chalk, Vance said, remembering the immediate neutralization of the dust dog. We don't have it. But Choi said the material is a near-perfect energy sink. And the chalk was a catalyst disruptor. We need to overwhelm the sink or disrupt the field. He looked around the car's interior, his flashlight beam frantic. There was nothing, no tools, no high-powered electronics, only basic police gear. Reyes, however, focused on the chattering sound. He's not just clicking, Elias. He's communicating. He's using sound to project the energy, to focus the drain. If he's the conductor, we cut the antenna. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from its bracket near her feet. He shut down the engine, but the battery is still physically connected. We need a short circuit, something powerful enough to overload the magnetic field, even for a second. Vance understood. The car's battery was a powerful, concentrated source of electrical energy. In this magnetically charged tunnel, disrupting it could create a momentary power surge that might break the collector's focus. It's suicide to stay in the car, Vance warned. It's suicide to run, Reyes countered. If we move, the crawlers get us. We hit the battery, we jump the magnetic field, and we run for the light. They threw open the doors. The cold air hit them like a physical blow. The clicking intensified, and the collector raised his arm, his white gaze fixing on them. I need 5 seconds, Reyes instructed, already sprinting to the front of the car. Cover me. Vance fired his pistol wildly at the crawlers, aiming for the noise and chaos, trying to draw the collector's attention. The rounds impacted the concrete tunnel walls, the sound deafening, but the collector didn't react to the gunfire. His focus was entirely on Reyes. Reyes threw open the hood. The air around the engine compartment was already humming. She gripped the fire extinguisher and, with a desperate heave, smashed the metal nozzle end down onto the positive terminal of the battery. A blinding, violent blue arc of electrical current instantly exploded from the battery terminal, conducted by the metal of the extinguisher and the moisture in the air. The arc ripped across the engine block with a furious roar, hitting the highly magnetic chassis of the car. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The heavy, pervasive hum that had saturated the tunnel cut out instantly. The collector's high-frequency clicking stopped mid-chatter. The white light in its eyes flickered and died, and the black dust of its suit seemed to loosen, collapsing slightly as its structural integrity failed. The entire tunnel plunged into absolute, pitch-black silence once more. Now, Vance screamed. He grabbed Reyes, who was staggering back from the blinding flash, her eyes temporarily shocked. They ran toward the distant circle of light at the end of the tunnel, pushing past the momentarily immobilized crawlers, which were now frozen mid-crawl, their gray forms looking like petrified statues. They burst out of the tunnel and onto the open highway, gasping for the clean, relatively warm night air. Behind them, the tunnel. Entrance remained dark. Did we kill it? Reyes choked out, leaning against the concrete barrier, rubbing her eyes. Vance shook his head, pointing back into the darkness. A faint, low sound was drifting out, a slow, deliberate thud. 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 It wasn't running. It was walking. The collector was moving again, its power source likely regenerating from the residual magnetism of the tunnel walls. But its movements were now slower, labored. The disruption had worked, buying them time. Vance pulled out his phone. He had 1 bar of service. He called Dr. Choi's secure number. Choi, we're out. The tunnel on I-40. Confirmed. He uses magnetism as a conduit. We shorted the battery, and it worked. Where are you? Safe house coordinates sent, Elias. But you won't have long. I've just finished analyzing the full magnetic scan of Sector 4. Choi's voice came back, strained. The magnetite seam doesn't just run under Crestline. It runs for 3 square blocks, completely encircling Cypress Creek PD headquarters. Vance and Reyes froze, looking back at the dark highway that led toward the city. The precinct is the biggest conductor in the sector, Vance realized. The list, the acquisition. It's not about finding us on the street. It's about containing us at the source of the magnetic field. Choi confirmed, her voice now a frantic whisper. The known void symbol isn't just a mark of disappearance, Detective. It's a glyph. I found a reference in Elara's hidden files. It's an ancient sign of localized dimensional severance. The collector isn't collecting victims for murder, it's collecting them to build an anchor. An anchor for what? Reyes demanded. An anchor for the sector itself, Choi replied. It's not just a localized energy drain. It's a tier. And every disappearance, every time that collector uses the energy, it widens the tear. Elara Jennings's final entry was the key. She believed the next major event, the final, irreversible severance, was scheduled to coincide with the next major electromagnetic spike. And that spike is due tonight. Vance and Reyes drove through the quiet suburban streets, now bathed in the sickly yellow of sodium lamps, their adrenaline slowly crashing. They knew they weren't just fighting a killer, they were fighting a localized catastrophe tied to their own headquarters. They arrived at the safe house, a small, rented bungalow on the edge of the city, far from Sector 4. Dr. Choi was already there, the aluminum briefcase open on the kitchen table, surrounded by laptops and geological maps. The atmosphere was one of strained, intense focus. I've stabilized the data from the microchip, Choi announced, pointing to a holographic projection of the corkboard map. The list of names isn't just a kill list. It's a roster of individuals who, by their profession or position, could inadvertently authorize or conduct an action that breaks the silence of the sector. The echo, Reyes muttered, understanding settling in. The collector takes the people who threaten the existence of the known void, who make noise. Exactly, Choi confirmed. And the list is primarily made up of former and current PD personnel. Not because they're corrupt, but because they have access to the largest, most consistent electromagnetic signature in Sector 4, the police headquarters. Decoding the symbol, Choi pulled up an image of the known void symbol, the open circle with the single vertical line. Elara Jennings had cross-referenced this glyph with ancient texts regarding geodesy and non-Euclidean geometry, Choi explained, zooming in on a tiny note scrawled on the margin of a geological survey. She believed the symbol represents an attempt to force a convergence. The circle is the magnetic field surrounding the sector. The line is the path the missing persons took. Vance looked closer at the map. The missing people didn't just disappear near the scene. They disappeared on a path that led to the same 3-block radius. And that path, Reyes finished, her eyes fixed on the headquarters building on the map, runs directly through the precinct's foundation. Choi nodded grimly. The victims weren't just being collected, they were being used. Their biomass, their life force, whatever that collector is, it's synthesizing the required energy for the severance. And it's using the magnetite seam to conduct and store it. The blackout event, Choi pointed to a complex, projected graph of historical energy spikes. The major severance events correlate exactly with periods of maximum sustained electromagnetic activity in the sector. The last major cluster of disappearances was in 2008. The next spike, the final, irreversible one, is projected to start within the next hour. And the headquarters will act as the lightning rod, Vance realized, the pieces of the horror finally clicking into a cohesive, terrifying whole. The collector is coming to the precinct not to kill us, but to use the massive electrical signature of the entire building to finalize the anchor and widen the tear. If that tear widens, Choi said, her voice shaking, it won't just be Sector 4 that's severed. It will be a localized, catastrophic environmental collapse. A permanent void. Everything connected to the magnetic field, the precinct, the houses, the people inside will be gone. The final code. Vance looked at the chalk they had used to temporarily stop the dust dog. It was still sealed in the lead-lined canister. If the chalk is the disruptor, it means the collector has a vulnerability, Vance said. We can't fight the magnetic field, but we can fight the collector's structure. Reyes pulled out Elara Jennings's final whispered audio clip from the microchip. They know my name. Why would the collector care about Elara's name? Reyes pondered. It's a sentient energy form. It doesn't need to gloat. Choi's eyes suddenly widened as she looked at the list of names, specifically at the badge number next to Vance's name. Badge 417. It's not about the name, Choi gasped. It's about the number. Look at the address of the crime scene. 419 Crestline. And your badge number, Detective. 417. The number is a geographical reference. The magnetite seam converges precisely between 417 and 419 on Crestline Drive. Vance realized the horrifying implication. He didn't just mark me as a target, he marked my location relative to the sector's core. Choi typed rapidly, cross-referencing all the missing person reports with the last known location of the victims before they went missing. She found a chilling pattern. Every victim's last known location contained a numerical reference, an address, a locker number, a utility pole marker that, when cross-referenced with the geological map, pointed to a very specific, sequential point along the magnetite seam. The victims are the rungs of a ladder, Choi declared, pointing to the map. And the list of marked officers is the code to unlock the final step. She isolated the number 47, the number of victims on the board, and the symbol of the known void. She typed in a command, translating the combination of numbers and glyphs through Elara's coded notes. The computer screen flashed, displaying a single, terrifying phrase, Code 47, Dimensional Severance Protocol. Initiate black hole.at. That moment, the lights in the safe house flickered violently, and a sharp, metallic tang filled the air. The low, heavy hum started up again, distant but undeniable. The black-suited collector was close. Vance looked at Reyes and Choi, the urgency now absolute. We have to get back to the precinct. It's the only way to disrupt the collector before he uses the main power grid. We need the chalk, Elias, Reyes reminded him. And a delivery system. We can't throw it at the entire building. Vance looked at the canister containing the chalk, then at the map showing the convergence point directly beneath the precinct. We don't throw it, Vance said, his voice grimly determined. We use the chalk to disrupt the collector's core structure, and we use the precinct's main electrical conduit as the conductor. We hit the source, not the symptom. The hum grew louder, a deep, pervasive vibration that signaled the collector's imminent arrival. Time was an enemy they no longer had. Vance, Reyes, and Choi piled into Reyes's sedan. Their plan was reckless, bordering on suicidal. They had to get inside the Cypress Creek PD headquarters, the largest electromagnetic conductor in the sector, and use the single piece of treated chalk to short-circuit the collector's operation during the final energy spike. The race against the Humas, they sped back toward the city center. The atmosphere changed drastically. Streetlights began flickering erratically, and radio signals dissolved into static. They were driving directly into a localized electromagnetic storm. The spike is starting, Choi confirmed, watching the magnetic readings on her laptop skyrocket. The collector is already in the vicinity of the precinct, drawing the energy into the magnetite core beneath the building. Reyes drove with a desperate intensity, swerving past stalled cars and ignoring traffic laws. We need to get to the substation, Elias. That's where the main power enters the building. It runs directly above the foundation. Vance carefully placed the lead-lined canister containing the chalk inside a heavy-duty, reinforced evidence bag. The chalk disrupts the structure. But if the chalk is the key, the symbol must be the cipher. He pulled out a printout of the known void symbol, the circle with the line through it. The circle is the field. The line is the path. We're on the path, Lena. And the precinct is the end point. The blackout at headquarters, they approached the Cypress Creek PD headquarters. The massive, concrete building, usually a beacon of order, was dark. All external lights were out, and only the faint, crimson glow of the emergency exit signs pierced the gloom. A few police cruisers were parked outside, their flashing lights muted by the darkness. An emergency generator sputtered feebly on the south side, barely keeping the communications room alive. The collector has already isolated the building from the main city grid, Choi said. He's drawing the power internally. It's a closed system now. They slipped through a maintenance gate and headed for the basement access. As they descended the concrete steps, the cold hit them, the same unnatural, focused chill they had felt in Elara Jennings's archive room. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of ozone and that familiar, sickly sweet perfume. In the basement corridor, the emergency lighting was strained. Vance drew his weapon, Reyes followed suit, and Choi carried the evidence bag. The substation is at the end of this hall, Reyes whispered, her breath frosting in the air. It's a heavily secured junction box, but I know the code. The substation and the Guardian, as they moved through the damp, subterranean maze, they saw evidence that the collector had already been here. Several fluorescent light fixtures had shattered, their glass fragments scattered on the floor. Near the main elevator shaft, the entire steel door was warped inward, showing massive, non-uniform pressure damage. Then, they heard the sound. Not the clicking, but the heavy, measured thud. Thud. Thud of the collector walking, coming from the floor above them, directly where the evidence locker and the chief's office were located. He's moving to the core, Elias, Reyes hissed. They reached the heavy, reinforced door of the substation. Reyes keyed in the access code. The deadbolt slid back with a loud, mechanical clunk. As the door swung inward, they found the room was not empty. Standing in the center of the substation, surrounded by sparking electrical conduits and massive humming transformers, was a figure. It was not the tall, black-suited collector. This figure was short, hunched, and clad in the same gray, broken skin as the crawlers. Its face was gaunt, and its mouth was fixed in a wide, silent scream. It wore what looked like the shredded remains of an old police uniform from the 1960s. Pinned to its chest, with a piece of rusty wire, was a police badge. Badge 47. The last of the victims on the archive board. This was a Guardian. An animated, powerful version of one of the collected. The Guardian raised its hands. Its movements were slow, but imbued with unnatural force. The exposed wires around it began to whip and coil, following its command. "Don't shoot," Choi yelled. "He's tethered to the power source. Shooting will just feed the energy into him." The Guardian let out a chilling, gurgling sigh. The air around its hands shimmered, and it began to pull the heavy, concentrated cold toward itself, condensing the sub-zero air into a dense, shimmering sphere of white energy. "The chalk, Elias." "No!" Reyes screamed. Vance knew they couldn't fight it head-on. He looked at the chalk in the evidence bag. He had to deliver the disruptor directly to the Guardian's core, the symbol on its chest, badge 47, the final piece of the code. He threw the bag at the Guardian with all his strength. The bag hit the Guardian's chest, right over the badge 47 symbol. The Guardian let out a silent, ragged scream, and the sphere of cold energy it was forming violently collapsed. The Guardian stumbled backward, momentarily paralyzed. Vance seized the moment. "Lena, the chalk." "No." Reyes plunged her gloved hand into the bag, snatched the piece of chalk, and without hesitation, jammed the sharp tip into the small gap between the badge and the Guardian's chest. The chalk snapped. The Guardian let out a final, excruciating, silent shriek. Its body didn't explode or fall. It began to rapidly age. Its gray skin turned to brittle dust. The uniform shreds dissolved. and the entire figure crumbled into a heap of fine, white powder, the same material as the chalk itself. The chalk had neutralized the collected energy, reverting it to its base state. They had destroyed the Guardian, but the relief was short-lived. From the hallway above, the heavy thud. Thud. Thud of the collector's slow, deliberate walk stopped directly over the substation. A new sound began. It was a rhythmic, pulsing sound, like a heart beating once every few seconds, but metallic and deep, resonating through the concrete floor. Pulse. 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 The electrical junction box near the ceiling sparked violently, and a massive, blue-white surge of energy shot through the main power cable, followed by an immediate, total darkness. The collector had fully activated the final stage of the severance protocol. The space was drowned in dense darkness, leaving only the heavy, pounding metal sound. Pulse. 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 It wasn't just a noise, it was a vibration knifing through the concrete, rattling their teeth and hollowing out their chests. "He's turned the auxiliary station into a breaker," Vance rasped, Rhea's lone flashlight beam catching the main power cables. "He's isolated the building to spike the electromagnetic field, turned the entire station into a giant conductor." "And that pulse is the countdown," Rhea said, tightening her grip on the now useless gun. "He's building the final resonance frequency. We have to get upstairs. Now." The elevator was twisted beyond use. They bolted for the nearest stairwell and climbed, taking the dark steps 2, 3 at a time. By the time they reached the first floor, the temperature had dropped so sharply that Choi was gasping for breath. The temperature's below 0 degrees C. 32 degrees Fahrenheit, Choi shivered. This is focused energy depletion. He's converting every scrap of electronic and thermal output in the building. Convergence point, the chief's office. They knew exactly where the collector would be, where the data center was, the brain of the station, the chief's office. It was the largest room, packed with electronics, sitting directly above the magnetic convergence of Sector 4. When they kicked in Chief Miller's office door, the sight inside stunned them. The man in black was no longer a solid figure. He stood in the center of the room where the chief's desk once anchored the space, but his body was now a churning void, a black cyclone, swirling violently. Black dust and white light from his eyes had fused into a glittering rift, like a miniature black hole. He was nearing his ultimate state, a being made entirely of consumed energy. The energy vortex was pulling everything toward him. Furniture, papers, even the paint on the walls stretched and peeled toward the center. His voice rose not from a mouth, but as a cold, synthesized presence vibrating directly in their minds. Silence. Echoes breed disorder. "I will forge the supreme range of roaming. My domain. The severance is complete." The collector turned his blinding gaze toward Vance. "For 17, Echo. You are what I need to complete the conductor. Add your complexity to this glorious simplicity. The final move." Vance tightened his grip on the fragment of chalk left from the battle with the Guardian. Rhea's eyes locked instead on the towering data server cabinet behind the chief's desk, the hub of the station's comms and backup power. "The servers," Rhea shouted, grabbing Vance. "It's where all the energy's feeding into. We have to put the chalk in there." While Vance and Reyes sprinted, Choi, ignoring the lethal pull in the room, set her laptop on a metal filing cabinet. She opened Elara Jennings' encrypted file, code 47, black hole initialization. Choi scrubbed frantically through Elara's notes, spotting one last, hastily written line. Plaster disrupts energy. Code 47 is the limit. 1 is the beginning. Vance. Reyes. Number 1. Choi screamed, eyes glued to the screen. Elara left us an exit. He's using 47 victims to form the circle. We have to break the sequence at 1. The collector reacted to her words. The vortex lurched toward Choi, its pull intensifying, dragging the laptop and cabinet across the floor. "Run!" Vance roared, hurling Reyes toward the server rack with everything he had. Reyes crashed into the trembling server cabinet. The main switch array was right in front of her, a complex nexus of ports and relays, lights blinking frantically from overload. Choi said 1, Reyes muttered. Facing the collector, Vance raised the chalk shard. The black dust limb of the entity stretched toward him, reaching to claim him. Vance drove the chalk into the outstretched arm. Just a small tear, but it was enough. The collector staggered. The vortex shuddered in pain. In that sliver of stolen silence, Reyes smashed through the casing of the switch array. Inside, she found the tangle of live cables and one small exposed slot. She shut her eyes and rammed the remaining chalk fragment into it. The reversed severance. There was no explosion, no fire. Instead, a shrill, crystalline scream split the air, like a colossal glass fell shattering. The collector's vortex unraveled violently. The black dust blew apart, revealing a cold silver light at its core. That silver beam snapped backward into the wall, cracking the concrete in a star-shaped fracture. The whole building shook. The chalk hadn't shorted out electricity, it had shorted the collector's structural energy, feeding the disruption into the overloaded conduction network powering his ritual. The collector was gone. All that remained was a thinning veil of black dust and a lingering, brutal cold. Vance collapsed to the floor, ears ringing. The emergency lights flickered back to life, then steadied. Power returned. Choi and Reyes were shaken, but alive. They had stopped the final dimensional severance. But when they turned to the star-shaped crack where the silver light had struck, they realized it was not a clean victory. At the center of the fracture, there was no concrete, no rebar. Just a piece of absolute black, an opening that reflected no light, like a patch of endless night stitched into the wall, still bleeding cold into the room. The severance had been reversed, but the wound remained. And from within that perfect black, a single, faint click echoed out, lonely and precise, then vanished into silence. The immediate aftermath inside the Cypress Creek PD headquarters was pandemonium, quickly followed by a ruthless, absolute silence orchestrated by forces far beyond Chief Miller, the cleanup and the live ants, Reyes, and Choi emerged from the destroyed substation to find the building locked down by a detachment of uniformed personnel wearing unmarked patches, led by stern, high-ranking federal agents. The agents were uninterested in the black dust, the melted wiring, or the neutralized guardian. They were only interested in the crack, the shimmering, fist-sized hole of absolute blackness in the chief's office wall. Within hours, the precinct was scrubbed. Every piece of evidence, the chalk fragments, the microchip data, Elara Jennings' corkboard, and the body of the guardian, was seized and vanished into federal custody. Chief Miller, pale and terrified, delivered the official narrative. A catastrophic electrical fire caused by faulty wiring exacerbated by an unrelated domestic dispute that led to the death of Elara Jennings. The massive blackout was classified as an isolated grid failure. The reports of an attacker and unusual phenomena were attributed to acute psychological stress suffered by Vance and Reyes. Vance and Reyes were officially placed on indefinite administrative leave. Dr. Choi's findings were sealed, and her professional credentials were put under immediate review. They were effectively silenced and professionally neutralized. The new unit 3 days later, Vance received an unmarked envelope delivered to his apartment. Inside was a single, plain card with a nondescript number and a time. He met Reyes and Choi in a dim, deserted coffee shop outside the city limits. They were 3 people who had seen a horror that the world refused to acknowledge, and the isolation was palpable. They took everything, Vance said, stirring his cold coffee. They want the story dead. They want the crack contained, Choi corrected. She lowered her voice. I managed to retrieve a satellite reading from my secure server. The magnetite seam under Sector 4 is no longer just a conductor. The crack is now a localized area of total magnetic nullification. It's sucking in the ambient electromagnetic energy of the city. Reyes leaned forward. So the severance protocol was incomplete, but the collector succeeded in creating a permanent drain. The void is still there. Suddenly, a woman in a perfectly tailored, dark gray business suit slid into their booth. She was middle-aged, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and she radiated authority. Detective Vance, Officer Reyes, Dr. Choi. I am Agent Celine Hale, Department of Homeland Security, Division of Unconventional Threat Assessment, she said, her voice quiet and steady. Congratulations. You survived a localized Level 5 crossover event. Vance bristled. A crossover? That thing was trying to pull our city into a different dimension. It was trying to create an anchor for a safe harbor in a dimension where conventional physics do not apply. We know what it was doing, Hale confirmed, her expression unreadable. We tracked the Collector, a construct we call the Inquisitor, for 30 years. It operates in magnetically resonant areas worldwide. It failed because you introduced the single, disrupting element into its structured sequence of 47 dots. Hale then laid out 3 sealed, black ID cards on the table. The official file is closed. You are legally contaminated, but you are also now uniquely qualified. The DHS doesn't want another Sector 4. The crack in the chief's office is still active. It's a wound, and it will draw the Inquisitor back or draw something else out. What are you proposing? Reyes asked, picking up the card. The 3 of you are now the core of a new, highly classified unit, Task Force Void. Your mission is simple: monitor, contain, and reverse localized dimensional anomalies. Starting with the one at Cypress Creek PD. You report only to me. Vance looked at the ID card. It listed his rank as analyst, not detective. He was officially gone, replaced by a ghost. The Inquisitor's legacy. Choi was hesitant. What about the Inquisitor? Did we destroy it? Hale gave a grim half-smile. The energy sink was disrupted, but it is an energy form. It didn't die, it was dispersed. It's currently in a state of suspended animation, likely reforming somewhere magnetically inert, far from the sector. So it will come back, Reyes stated flatly. Eventually. But it left behind a signature, Hale said, pointing to the name tags on the table. Vance, Reyes, and Choi looked down. Embedded in the corner of each black ID card, visible only under the faint cafe light, was the same tiny, recurring symbol, the open circle with the vertical line, the known void. The Inquisitor's final act before dispersal was to tag its successful disruptors, Hale explained. You are now flagged. You are no longer the Echo, Detective Vance. You are now classified as the recalcitrants, the targets that didn't comply. The Inquisitor will remember you, and it will learn from its failure. Vance picked up his card, feeling the cold weight of the knowledge and the terror. They hadn't escaped the sector. They had simply been recruited to fight its continuation. So where do we start, Agent Hale? Vance asked, his voice now steady, the detective instinct reasserting itself. Hale pointed to the map Choi had printed. The magnetite seam runs through the entire sector. The crack in the wall is small, but the drain is large. We need to find every single access point the Inquisitor used in Sector 4 before it draws enough energy to reopen the gate. And what if we find another one of those black dust dogs or crawlers? Reyes asked. Hale opened her briefcase and pulled out a single, perfectly white cylinder wrapped in industrial foil. Then you use this. Pure calcium carbonate, custom milled. We call it Nolchuk. It's the only thing that works. Return to the Void 3 weeks later. Task Force Void, Vance, Reyes, and Choi stood outside the perimeter of Sector 4. The city had moved on, believing the official lie of the electrical fire, but the sector itself felt colder, darker, and impossibly quiet. They were dressed in discreet tactical gear, carrying no police markings and armed with standard-issue pistols and Choi's specialized kit, which included the nunchuck rounds. Their target was 419 Crestline, the site of the initial murder, which the city had officially condemned, but which Agent Hale confirmed was another point of severe magnetic nullification, a secondary, smaller crack mirroring the one at the precinct. The nunchuck is pure disruptor, Elias, Choi explained, checking the custom-milled cartridges for Reyes's shotgun. It doesn't just neutralize the dust, it destabilizes the energy lattice of anything the Inquisitor creates. Use it only if they are actively forming. As they approached the condemned house, the atmosphere grew heavy. The air was not just cold, it felt pressurized. The pervasive scent of sickly sweet perfume and metallic blood was faint, but unmistakable. The second crack, they bypassed the police seals and entered 419 Crestline through the back door. The house was exactly as they had left it, only encased in a layer of dust and decay. The kitchen floor still bore the dried bloodstain. They moved straight to the archive room. The splintered door remained, but the room itself had been sealed by federal agents, now marked with heavy-duty thermal tape. Vance tore the tape away and forced the door open. The room was almost perfectly clean. No severed head, no corkboard. The only sign of the horror was a localized patch of dense white mold blooming on the concrete floor where the Guardian had crumbled, a residual trace of the chalk's chemical reaction. Reyes swept her flashlight beam across the far wall, where the corkboard had been. The concrete was clean, except for the spot where the Inquisitor had drawn the known void symbol. That area was now a patch of intensely concentrated blackness. There it is, Vance breathed. The secondary crack. It wasn't a gaping hole like the one in the precinct. It was a perfectly smooth, circular patch of absolute, light-absorbing blackness, about the size of a dinner plate. It was not a shadow. It was the absence of light, a two-dimensional anomaly fixed to the wall. As Choi ran a spectrometer over the anomaly. The device immediately failed, its internal display fracturing. The whisper. Choi backed away, her face pale. It's a perfect energy void. It's draining the entire room. If we stand here too long, the energy drain will kill us through sustained hypothermia. As the cold intensified, a new sound emerged from the black circle. It wasn't the clicking of the Inquisitor, but a faint, multi-layered whisper, the sound of dozens of voices talking at once, muffled, confused, and terrified. The collected, Reyes whispered, clutching her shotgun. We're hearing the voices of the 47 victims. The whispers grew louder, resolving into recognizable fragments. A child crying, a woman's terrified scream, a man pleading for help. They were echoing from the other side of the void. Vance raised his pistol toward the black circle. They're not echoes. They're trapped. Suddenly, one voice cut through the chaos, clear, synthetic, and bone-chillingly familiar. It was the synthesized voice of the Inquisitor, echoing from the void, but distorted, as if being spoken through a column of water. For 17. Detective Vance. The echo is required. The rung is unstable. You will complete the path. The black circle began to expand, growing wider, pulsating with an unseen rhythm. From its center, a fine, thin stream of black liquid, the same oily substance that stained the cruiser's windshield, began to weep down the wall. The new thread. As the void pulsed, the cold air solidified. A shape began to peel away from the black circle. It wasn't the Inquisitor, and it wasn't a crawler. It was a perfect, two-dimensional silhouette of the Inquisitor, a flat black form, like a cutout from the darkness itself, sliding away from the wall and beginning to grow three-dimensional, condensing the air and dust around it. A projection. He's using the crack to send a smaller construct through. Choi yelled, grabbing a thermal imaging camera. Its core is unstable. Hit it now. The silhouette snapped into a solid, but smaller version of the black-suited man, its white eyes blazing with malevolence. It was armed with a piece of rebar it had ripped from the wall. Reyes didn't wait. She shouldered the shotgun and fired a null-chalk round. The round struck the figure's chest. Instead of exploding, the null-chalk burst into a brilliant, pure white flash. The black-suited figure immediately collapsed, its form tearing apart at the seams, dissolving into a stream of silver light that was violently pulled back toward the black circle. The silver light shot into the void. The whispers inside the circle immediately cut off, replaced by a single, terrifying sound, a brief, electronic scream that was instantly muted. The black circle immediately shrank, receding until it was a tiny, imperceptible spot of darkness on the concrete. Then it was gone. The cold subsided and the air returned to normal, the legacy of the void silence. Total, absolute silence returned to 419 Crestline. They had sealed the secondary crack. The sector was quiet once more, its magnetic field seemingly normalized. Vance looked at the wall, then at the empty shotgun in Reyes's hands. We just sent a piece of him back to the main body. And he knows exactly how to get back out, Reyes finished grimly. Choi checked her spectrometer, which was now functional. The magnetic anomaly is gone. But look at this. She pointed the device at the wall where the crack had been. The display showed no magnetic flux, no thermal abnormality. But then she pointed it at Vance's chest, right where his hidden badge 417 was located. The display flashed a single reading, -4.17. Negative flux. He marked you not just as a target, Elias, Choi concluded, her eyes wide with dread. He tethered you. When he sent that energy back, he linked your signature to the void. You are no longer just the echo. You are now a permanent resonance point. They had stopped the severance, but they hadn't stopped the Inquisitor. They had simply become part of his geometry. The true horror wasn't the murder or the dust. It was the eternal, silent war to keep the void from claiming the world, a war they were now permanently drafted into. Vance looked